Today, you're in for a real treat. I had the absolute pleasure of welcoming my good friend John Wheatcroft to the podcast. Not only is he a fabulous guitar player, equally well-versed in styles such as rock, blues, fusion, jazz, gypsy jazz, you name it, but somehow he's also managed to find the time to get really good on the bass and double bass as well. If you've not heard his last album, First Light, then you should definitely check it out because it's full of some absolutely stunning compositions. John's also one of the finest educators in the UK and equally generous with his knowledge, which, believe you me, is extremely deep. So I managed to pick his brains on subjects such as outside playing and how he approaches practice in general. Enjoy this one. Hello, John. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming. We've only just started this podcast, so really happy to have you on, and really keen to dig into your brain and your guitar playing. So maybe I could just start off. Just tell me what you're up to at the moment. Are you busy coming up to Christmas, or how's it all going?
Yeah, look, I'm always playing. You know, I'm sort of quite fortunate in the fact that I've got a lot of gigs, which is great. You know, and I do get a lot of opportunity to actually play the music I want to play, you know, which is great, you know. I sort of go in between doing, because I played sort of Django Reinhardt style gypsy jazz, and this sort of American songbook jazz and fusion are probably the three things that I'd say kind of like my thing. And then obviously all the usual other stuff that everyone does, you know, shows and you know, the money earners really, if I'm being honest, the stuff that you used to, you know. But I do get a lot of opportunity to play, which is really great because my practice is all based on pretty much 100% based upon preparing for stuff that I'm actually going to do when I play. So the fact that I've got kind of an avenue to actually express these ideas means I've sort of like got a reason to keep on top of them, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's pretty busy. Out tonight, out last night. I'm going to go and see Paul McCartney tomorrow, which is quite nice.
Great.
And then playing Sunday, yeah. So usually like 4 gigs a week, sometimes more. Which is great, and I played double bass as well. I've been playing double bass for the last couple of years, or since lockdown basically, and that's great. You know, so I play with the same unit a lot, and I'll kind of flip between both depending upon because we do so many of them. It's almost never the A team. There's always someone's doing something else, so I'll either jump on bass or guitar. You know, which is great, and it's given me a different perspective. It's actually made my guitar playing better as well, I think. You know, because I sort of have to be a bit more conscious when I play double bass, whereas guitar, you can sort of slip into autopilot a little bit because, you know, I've played these tunes for years, you know, whereas I have to think about it a little bit more. And then that means when I then go back to playing on guitar, I find I'm thinking about it a bit more as well because I've sort of revisited it from a different angle, if that makes sense.
I suppose as well, we've always said, like, become a bassist, you'll have more gigs. So you've
you've got to be a little bit careful, like, because like, the guy plays in my trio, usually when I'm playing down in London, Mark Rose, who's incredible. Do you know Mark from Ealing, bass guy? Well, Mark's a guitar player, you know. But practically nobody knows he's a guitar player because he's so busy, and he's amazing on bass. So he doesn't really get the call very often to play guitar, but not for any reason. It's not to the detriment of his guitar playing by any stretch of the imagination. It's just because people consider him to be a bass player, you know. And he did sort of, you know, kind of playfully warn me off. You know, first said, you know, just be careful that this is something you want to do because the phone will ring. So I've kind of got a little bit of a sort of unwritten rule, you know, that I will always preference guitar over bass, you know, like sort of that's like I'm always going to take the guitar gig over the bass gig, you know, obviously without being professional about it and not letting people down or whatever, you know, and it seems to be on balance at the minute, you know, but I suppose you just got to keep a watchful eye in case it goes too much one way or the other, you know. But at the minute it seems to be working, you know. And then I've got the usual other stuff, you know. I've had some nice shows coming up, and I do a bit of depping on various shows or whatever. And so I've got a thing coming up on Bridgewater Hall on New Year's Eve with Elliot. That'd be nice, Elliot Henshaw. Because Elliot's moved back up here now, so if people don't know, you know, I work in London a lot, but I live in Liverpool, which it's kind of like presented some quite nice opportunities, really, because a lot of these kind of particularly touring shows, you'll find if, you know, so for argument's sake, you know, if there's a theatre in Blackpool or something like that, you know, like, and the guy who lives in Brighton probably doesn't want to go to Blackpool because it's going to take him 6 hours to get there. if the word gets out that there's somebody up north who can actually cover these things, it does seem to be that my phone's ringing, and if a few projects have sort of been in touch and said, anything sort of north of Birmingham, if you want to do it, it's yours, So that seems to be a thing for somebody sort of more sort of busy touring shows where they've got like sort of regional guys, I suppose there's one band that I played with, one of these theatre shows that I play with, they've got like a Scottish, a guy who does anything that's in Scotland, that's anything that's sort of, from Carlisle down to Birmingham's mine, and then everything from Birmingham onwards seems to go to the London guys, So, I mean, the only thing about it is it means keeping on top of loads of material, but, it's kind of part of practice, that, I guess.
Well, that's definitely one of the things I want to talk to you about a little bit later on, how you kind of compartmentalize everything and manage to organize your time, because that's really interesting from a sort of practice perspective, but maybe we'll get into that a little bit later on.
Sure, yeah. It's hard. It's probably, I often say to people it's the most difficult thing. Playing's kind of the easy bit, isn't it? It's making certain you're doing the right thing at the right time and you're in the right place is the art part.
One of the things I get asked a lot by students, well, I guess we all do, is this whole kind of outside, this mysterious outside thing, and this idea of tension and release. So I kind of wanted to ask you about that, and maybe there's a few things you can sort of show us how you think about it, and maybe, does your playing differ from the way you practice or the way you teach how to do this?
I mean, I hope not. I mean, that's another thing sort of ties in with the thing of playing so much, is that what it allows me to do is try stuff out. And I know that, I don't mean that to sound like at the disrespect of the gig, like meaning, that I'm doing things that are half baked, but some gigs are kind of like, shall we say, more precious than others in terms of there's more riding on it. So, if I'm playing something and it's a concert and everyone's silent and they're hanging on every note, I'm probably less likely to try something I've not really explored before than I am if I'm playing, sort of like my regular gig tonight. It's like a Parisian style, bar, for want of a better word, and they have a Django band in the corner. And for the most part, there'll be a little kind of crescent of people in front of us who are listening, and then most of them are just on a night out, So that's where I can kind of try stuff out. I can audition things, So that's basically what I do, practice stuff and then try and work it into the act, which is one of the things like what sort of got me onto playing jazz, really, because, I'm like a lot of guys our age, Steve, we sort of grew up in the shred era, when I was 20, I wanted to be Van Halen, I didn't want to be Joe Pass, but there came a thing where it was like I was practicing stuff, so it's like just to throw it on the pile, and I wasn't sure exactly when I was going to use it, Like, let's learn another variation of a tapping lick that I may or may not use at some point down the line. Whereas when I started playing jazz and turning up to sort of a jam night, Sunday night jam night, which I've spoken about this many times before, but like sort of college lecturers did this Sunday night jazz night, and me and my mates would go down and they'd get me up, and say, come and play a couple of tunes. And whatever I was practicing on Thursday or Friday, I could try. So I get out of home, it was like, okay, so I've worked on this thing, or I tried it last week and it didn't really come off. So I'll work on it again and I'll have another go, as I get back on the horse, so to speak. So there's a certain immediacy to it that I found was like, okay, everything I'm practicing, I kind of like got somewhere to use it, rather than this like, well, I might use this, maybe at some point, And you find that's maybe one of the differences between the ways that, if you speak to a lot of jazz guys and say, what are you working on? They've usually got a really explicit purpose. It's like, I'm working on rhythm changes, or I'm figuring out Coltrane changes, or I'm trying to, plug some 2-5-1 ideas into Stella by Starlight or something. As opposed to, I'm just practicing arpeggios, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to use them quite yet. But it's just, I'm amassing the skill with the, maybe, with the hope that it might actually manifest itself in my playing. Whereas, if you're going, okay, well, so for example, 20 minutes ago, if you'd listened to me practicing, I was working on Troubadour Bolero. It's a Django tune. I'm going to play it tonight, So the stuff that I'm practicing today, I've found a new way to get around the bridge section. It's like, I'm going to give it a go, and it may work and it might not,
Is it like you have to have the consequence, almost like a gun to your head?
A little bit.
To be able to express something. Is that the idea?
Well, I mean, some of it's just based upon need, isn't it, really? Because, like the fact is, I know I've got to play tonight and I've got to have things to say. And again, part of the thing of playing so often is, I played with these guys last night. I can't just trot out the same stuff. They'll know, like they'll call me out on it. If I play the same outro lick every single night, they're gonna call me out on it. So to a certain extent, I'm aware of the fact that half the time when we're playing to each other, and there's the thing where it's like, oh, I've heard you do that loads, so you've got to try and find another way to play the melody or something like that. But and some of it, I guess, it's, I mean, you said you want to get onto it later on, which is fine, but what I kind of have two things that I do with practice. One is sort of general maintenance, and that could be anything, and that's not that focused, meaning that can be just on an as and when ad hoc thing, and I can touch on that for a day or two and then move on to something else. But then I've also got like bigger topics that I'll stick with for months, like absolute. At the minute I've got 2 on the go, and I've been on them for like 3-4 months probably. One for a bit longer than that, one for about 6 months, and one for about 3 or 4. And I come back to it, so I alternate them daily. So today I'm on one of them, which is kind of like I've got some. There's a book by Steve Kahn called Pentatonic Concepts, but spelled concepts, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. But I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of that, really. Taking some of those things, and it's brilliant, but it can only go so far, because it can only go so far, and it's however many years old, but I've kind of taken that as the start point. I'm going, okay, if he wrote volume 2, where could it go, and I'm sort of expanding upon that. So, I don't claim any kind of originality for the initial idea, but I'm hoping that I'm taking it in places that maybe even Steve might not have imagined, But then there's one thing, thinking about these things, there's another thing actually happening when you play. So those things, I'll stick with them for ages, and then hopefully they will start, and they are already happening in my playing, but maybe not to the level or to the fluency I'd like them to be, So, and I'm always chipping away at that. So that's something I just keep coming back to, and I'll keep coming back to that till the middle of next year or something probably. By which time it'll be replaced by something else, And so the other thing I'm working on is like 2-part playing, trying to improvise 2 lines at the same time, So it starts with all the like. First thing is figure out what everyone else is doing. So Jimmy Weibel and guys like that, and Gilad Hexelman and all those players that that do that kind of thing. So post Rosenwinkel jazz guitar players who've sort of like there's sort of a renaissance for Jimmy Weibel, who was kind of largely forgotten for a little while, it seems, which is a shame because he's amazing. But then trying to sort of filter that through in my own way, so that I suppose you could say probably one of the best known players who a lot of people would know he did that kind of thing was Ted Green, where he'd sort of improvise like Bach, 2-part inventions, but on the fly. So, and I'm nowhere near that yet, but I'm working on it.
Not a lot of people are that close.
Yeah. Well, what ends up happening is, for me, is it starts off as something usually sort of semi-composed. Right, so I've got something that I kind of know that I already know what it is, but the audience might not. The audience thinks, oh, he's just pulled that out the hat, but I kind of know. I've sort of worked that one out. And I start off with worked out ideas, and then they start to morph into things that I can sort of figure out on the fly. But that takes ages, That's what happens once you've been messing with it for a year or two,
Going back to this kind of, the whole kind of outside thing. Like if a typical, your typical student came to see you, like, I'd like to play outside. I like, I like Robben Ford. I like, they're kind of blues players, but they want to step outside. This kind of thing, like where would you take that?
Okay, so the first thing is to recognize what it is. When we say outside playing, what are we talking about? And essentially, it's a form of, like, for want of a better expression, it's a form of like musical pantomime, really. That's what it is. Robben Ford can play inside pretty well. He knows all the right notes. John Scofield knows what notes work over D-7. So rather like if you went to the circus and you saw that high wire act or whatever they're called, they can walk over this thing whilst eating a dinner, making a phone call. You see these guys riding around on bikes, texting people or whatever, riding with one hand, with no hands, They've got perfect sense of balance, So the high wire act on the circus can do that all day long and with no fear of falling off, But there's no drama in it. So the audience wants to see them, hanging off by one finger or whatever, thinking, oh, they might fall. And there's no way they're going to fall, because they're really secure, their sense of balance and their sense of kind of security is really there, So I know Robben Ford could play inside all day long, and make it work forever. But then where is the tension? Where is the drama, So in a way, playing outside is a form of like musical pantomime, where we kind of feign that we're playing notes that are creating tension, that are creating a sense of dissonance. you know, like, oh, how are we going to get out of this one, you know, like, you know, like there's always an idiot in Big Brother, isn't there, you know, like they have to, you know, or they starve them or something, or like deprive them of sleep so they all have a fight, because if they all just got on, it would be boring. So you have to have a bit of turmoil to create a little bit of a sense of drama so that there's some interest there. And outside playing's kind of that. It's you're in D minor. Okay, what are all the right notes? You know, quote unquote right notes. But then if you've got some sense of how can you throw the other notes into the mix, then it gives you something to resolve. Jimmy Bruno, I don't know if you know Jimmy Bruno, New York-based jazz guitar player, been around for a long time. He's got a really great way of thinking of outside and inside playing. Like the way that he organizes scales is not the conventional kind of in a line like you'd learn it on a you know whiteboard in a school. You know, you write the scale in a line. He sees it more like, you know, like it's sort of concentric circles. You know, so the center of the circle you got like the tonic. So say it was D Dorian, that would be D. He's right in the middle. That's the center of the universe, right? Then the first ring would be the strong chord tones, probably the triadic chord tones. So the F and the A, they're in the outer layer, or the inner layer, forgive me. And then the next one would be the consonant extensions, you know, 2nd, 9th, 11th, or whatever. Maybe even 13 in the case of Dorian. So Dorian's one of those rare but elite harmonic scenarios where every note is shall we say validated, for want of a better word. So there's no kind of avoid tones. There's no notes that you would say are in the scale that create tension, which presents you with a lot of possibilities. And it's good to know what they are. And there's a limited number of them, but there's enough of them to go around. There's enough of them to actually make music. So that's all the kind of the inside. So that makes sense of like you're inside and you're going kind of to the outer ring of harmony. And then what he says is outside that, then the next ring is the tensions, you know. So that's like the E flat and the, you know, the G flat and the, you know, the notes that are not, it's Rhythmic D, that is, if it's D Dorian. So all the sharps and flats, you know, and we've got them outside. So what we can do, we can bring them in. So you can either bring them in on a kind of a guest pass, you know, as in we can bring D flat in if it's kind of if it's connected by the D natural and the C natural, or you can bring it in as part of something else. So I could bring, if I'm in the key of D Dorian, saying I want to bring an E flat in, well, I can bring it in by setting up a harmonic move. Like I could imagine I've gone from D minor to C minor, because C minor contains that E flat. So I can imagine that there's a harmonic move that's happening that's not there, that allows me to bring that note in. So that's the kind of thing Jimmy does. And I thought that makes perfect sense of the idea of inside moving to more outside. And then we get to the idea then, if you look at players like, or thinkers like someone like George Russell, you know, he ponders over, well, which is more dissonant, you know, is a flat 9 more dissonant than a flat 6 and stuff like that. And you can get into like degrees of dissonance, you know. But essentially that's what it is. It's setting up some form of drama, you know, and sometimes it's kind of, it could be unintentional. You just, you know, do it by accident or whatever. But in what those guys like Robben and Schofield and all those players who are real experts at this, they've got strategy. They've got some strategies in place of ways that will allow them to achieve that, you know. And there's multiple ways of doing it, you know. I always look at, for me, the sort of gold standard of all this stuff is Michael Brecker. And I've paid anything Michael Brecker's got to say about anything. I'm interested, you know. I want to know what he's got to say about anything, you know. And he's got a lot of really, really cool ways of approaching this. And some of them he's gleaned from other people, you know. So I'd say to guitar players, you know, it's probably not a bad idea to have a chat to your saxophone playing friends, because they're really good at this, you know. They've spent, you know, if they're of a modern kind of, you know, vibe, then they will have spent quite some time looking at this, I would think, you know, because they're going to be familiar with guys like Brecker. They probably know about Gary Campbell and people like that, you know. And people like Jerry Bergonzi, you know, who've got, it's not to chance. This stuff is not left to chance. They've actually got some strategic ways of doing this. So that might be something that, you know, I'm more than happy to share some of these, you know. And I wouldn't say, you know, so first off, by way of a sort of disclaimer, you know, I'm not claiming, by the way, that I've invented any of these, you know. I've just kind of like stumbled across them just in terms of just researching, just paying attention to what some players who seem to be really good, you know, Herbie Hancock is the master of sidestepping, you know. So if you want to learn about that, then he's the person to go to, you know. Schofield's pretty good with that kind of stuff. If you want to learn about playing off phantom chord changes, then someone like Breck is great. George Benson's really good for that. George Benson's got some really cool, like, little tricks up his sleeve that you might want to be aware of, so that way you can just try them out. It's like concepts that, and they probably start off as licks, but they can be concepts, Yeah.
I wonder, maybe there's some stuff you can perhaps share on the guitar, maybe.
Yeah, I'll show you. Maybe I could give you 4 or 5, or maybe 5 or 6 different ways. So the first and probably most simple way of doing this is this thing called sidestepping, which is essentially just taking a musical idea and moving it up or down by half step or half steps, multiple, right? And it can be done in a super crude way, or it can be done in a really subtle way and a really kind of hip way. So the crude way is to just take whatever it is you've played and just move it up or down in semitones. But that can be really, really obvious and can be quite corny. So you've got to be a little bit careful about overusing that one, because it can sound like a bit like sort of, the old hitting a nut with a sledgehammer, So if I set up a D minor tonality, and hopefully you can hear the guitar okay. So if I just take a real simple phrase, so something like, if I'm in D minor, I go as a phrase, it's a 4-note phrase, that kind of. So either of those two, it's the same phrase, just transposed. So the simple way of doing this and the crude way of doing it would be to just take the same phrase and move it around. So you got like, but that's going to really not sort of. You can't overuse that, right? So what someone like Pat Metheny does when he does these kind of sidestepping ideas is he doesn't necessarily move the whole idea. He just moves a little portion of it. So imagine you've got this 4-note motif. So what he's going to sidestep might not necessarily be all 4 notes. He might just sidestep the first 2. So instead of using this, he'll use just the first 2 notes. So he'll go. That kind of thing. So you'll hear him moving that around all over the place, because now it's rhythmically displaced. So he'll be going, instead of just going, which is really obvious, he might go, that kind of thing. So it's creating a sense of rhythmic drama. So that's something that you could. That's a real basic thing you could do. Is take any kind of pattern that you've got. So real slow, I'm playing 4 notes, and then I'm going to take just the first 2 and go up, say, a semitone. Then a 4-note pattern, as a way of kind of moving in and out of the harmony. Does that make sense? The Herbie Hancock way of doing things is to take a phrase. So say we take an inside phrase. So this is the kind of thing you might hear Pat Martino, Charlie Parker. So say I go something like. So that's kind of a sort of standard Dorian kind of like jazz line, Joe Pass my player, something like that, with a little bit of chromaticism. What Herbie will do is he'll move the phrase up or down in semitones mid-phrase. So he might go like so. So that was moving up. I went now. So I'm moving the phrase, but without breaking the phrase. So I can do that down. I can go. So it's as if I'm going. I'm moving in and up and down by semitones, but mid-phrase, don't break the phrase. So the idea is you're playing along in key. Oh, we've just suddenly. It's like the feign and a fall. It's that thing again, the tightrope walk feigns a fall. Are they going to fall over? No, they're not. They can write that pretty quickly. So that's something to think about, is whatever the pattern is. And you can do it with set patterns. If you were going, you can go, and move it. And that's kind of like Joe Diorio type thing. He'll take a pattern and move the pattern, but whilst keeping the pattern going, if that makes sense. So that's better than going, which is really, really obvious, So if I went, it's really obvious what I'm doing. But
you can hear it straight away. Yeah.
And so on, you know. That kind of thing.
I think because the guitar, obviously, it's a bit different to a lot of other instruments where you've got different fingering patterns for the same scale, up and down a semitone. I guess because it's so easy to do on guitar, it's quite easy to fall into that trap of just playing the same pattern over and over again.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not against that. I'm not saying don't do it. And if you go through, if you watch me playing on YouTube, you might find me doing it and call me out on it. Right? I'm sure I have done it. But I'm aware of the fact that you can't overuse that one. You can't. Whereas this other thing, where you kind of, whatever the phrase you're playing, you kind of move in the middle of the phrase. That's a little bit more disguised. That's not quite so obvious what you're actually doing. So I think that's kind of like, so they're the two ways, the two ways that I use sidestepping. One is whatever phrase I'm playing, I'll move it up or down in semitones, but I won't play all of it. If I'm playing a 6-note phrase, I'll maybe just take 3 notes. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and then move, so that then it's rhythmically interesting. Because it's not just the same thing over and over again, like 4s and 2s work quite well. So maybe you might want to work with a 4-note pattern that you repeat round and round, and just move the first 2, because then you're going to get daga duga daga daga duga daga daga duga daga, and it's rhythmically, and you can play around with it.
Presumably, you do the same thing with like pentatonic scales, like even simpler things.
Yeah. So say you're playing, so you got, so I could go. That's my pattern. I can go. Yeah, and Pat Metheny does that all the time, man.
Wow.
That's something you hear Pat do all the time. The other thing Pat will do is Pat will have 2 patterns, and he goes between them. So Pat might have something like, that's a pattern, and he might go, but then he might have an opposing pattern. So and he'll go between them. Those kind of things, and he's switching between these 2 patterns, and you don't know which one he's going to play. So that's why it doesn't sound like he's going, which is really predictable. It's like you don't know when he's going to flip between one or the other. Holdsworth does the same thing. He plays these kind of motifs, but he doesn't use the same one. And where people mess up when they're trying to imitate Holdsworth by just taking some shape and flying it around the neck, I kind of, I've seen loads of guys go, here's what Alan's doing. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm sorry. No, it isn't. Right. Where they just take some shape and fly it around the neck, moving up and down semitones. Like, no, he ain't doing that at all. No, he's not doing that. What he's doing is he's got more than one of these cells and he's moving between them, kind of like, like what, weirdly enough, because I've done a fair bit of transcribing of Brecker and Metheny and Holdsworth, right? And when you see them on the page, they look remarkably similar. A lot of the differences between them is the sound. Right, if you played Michael Brecker's lines with Alan Holdsworth's guitar tone, you'd think it was Holdsworth. Right, and likewise, if Michael Brecker played Holdsworth's lines on saxophone, you'd believe it completely. You'd go, yeah, it sounds like Brecker. So they're pretty much using similar language, but sometimes we identify it because one of them's an overdriven bridge pickup on a, and the other one's tenor saxophone or what have you. So sidestepping is one thing, and that's one that So by the way, just by way of for brevity's sake, all of these ideas are going to be things that you would do in a static situation for today. Because if you start getting into ways of playing outside of chord changes, we could be here all year, but so just by way of you can apply sidestepping and things like that to playing through changes, but really when you're playing through chord changes, there's a different set of criteria, to be honest, because you've got to be there's almost kind of like what we have to do there is we have to figure out which changes are, like, shall we say, harmonic supporting walls, and which ones can we take down. Which ones can we play out on, and which ones really need to be there for it to sound like we're actually in the right key. Like for it to sound like we're not just playing random stuff. That we want to sound like we're actually outlining the harmony of whatever piece we're playing. So that's a different consideration, but there's the same type of concepts. They're just different. So the ones I'm going to outline today are maybe things that you maybe do if you're in a static situation, which, to be fair, that's where most guitar players are going to want to try and employ these, because most players are not thinking, how can I make playing through changes more complex? It's usually the opposite. How can I put some substitute extra changes into moment's notice? Yeah, no. Most people like.
Can I just get through this?
Yeah. Is there a way to get rid of can I deharmonize as opposed to reharmonize this piece? Yeah, that's what guitar players want to deharmonize pieces, not reharmonize them. Yeah. Is there a way to do that? Yeah. So this is kind of like things that you could do over like one chord or some kind of groove, if you like. So if you find yourself playing over D minor, another thing you can do is you can create phantom moves that are not present. So the most common one, again, I just remember D minor chord. The most common one is to imagine it's going like some kind of 5, that's going 5 to 1. So you're going A7 or E flat 7, like the 19 Tunisia does, like that kind of thing. So to imagine phantom moves that are not present, so that's to think, you could think 2-5-1, so I could actually think. So against that one chord, I could think. So then I'm playing a move that's not there, and I deliberately chose a kind of an outside 2 chord there. So I'm playing a minor 7 flat 5, but with a natural second, because that's the major third. So can you use the major third over a minor chord? Well, I would say yes, if you know what you're doing with it, yeah? So if I go, that doesn't sound out to anyone. To me, that doesn't sound outside. That sounds really inside, but it really is outside, because that isn't in D minor, yeah? And neither is A7. So I'm actually going, neither of which notes are actually in the tonality, but it's completely believable because your ear will go on the journey. If I play, so it's good to know how these resolutions resolve. So if I play, where does that want to go? It wants to either go up or it wants to go down. So if I end up playing something like that's going to want to go down or up. So knowing where those things resolve is really kind of important. So that would be one thing, is phantom 2-5s or phantom 2-5-1. So I could go 2, 5, 1, 6 even. So I could play that against the static groove. So against that static groove, and then against something like that, all against D minor. So what I'm implying there is E minor 7. In this case, I chose E minor 7 flat 5 with a natural second, some kind of A7 altered, go into D minor 6, perhaps 6-9, to B minor 7 flat 5, again with a raised 9 if you want, with a natural 9, and that's that sound. And all of that can be played over D minor 7, that can be played against D minor 7. So that's one thing you can do. You can imagine chord changes, and you hear that all the time, that bebop thing, players playing 2-5-1s over a 1, right? Now there's a more advanced version of this, which you can thank George Benson for. So I'd say get hip with that one first before you try the more advanced version. And the more advanced version is the one that's not really talked about that much, but George is definitely doing it. And that is, if we work on the principle that D minor can also be other things, right? If I go D minor 9, say, well, that's F major 7, and that's a D underneath it, yeah? Or it's also, there's A minor 7, and there's a D underneath it, and maybe there's a D minor, which is a C major 7 with a D underneath it. So that's kind of quite common. Everyone knows you can play against D minor. You could play D minor 7, and against D minor you can play F major 7, and against D minor 7 you can play A minor 7, and against D minor you can play C major. What a lot of people don't know is you can play the 5s of those chords. So you can think, okay, D minor, A7 takes me to D minor, yeah. C7 altered takes me to F major, which takes me to D minor. So I can play C7 altered to get me to F major, because F major is D minor. And I can play E7 altered get me to A minor, because A minor is D minor. It's in the same sound. So George plays the 5 of the superimposed chord, and it creates tension. That's the point. You know, you might go, oh, those notes sound tense. I'm like, yes, thanks. That's what they're meant to do. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to create tension. So you could play G7 altered, going to C major 7 over D minor. So it's setting up a move of the 5 of this, which is in place of that. And that's something that you'll hear George do. And you can play 2-5-1, you know. It's kind of like Wes doing the things like where he do tritone 2-5s and stuff like that, you know. So you'd often hear Wes do, like, so he's playing over D minor and he'll play E flat, but he'll play B flat minor, 4 on 6 and things like that, you know. You hear that 2-5. So B flat minor has got no place over D minor, but it has got a place over E flat 7, which then takes you to D minor. So what you're doing, that's just heightening the drama. That's to take the pantomime analogy. That's you know, he's behind you. You know, that's what, you know. Oh no, he's not. You know, that's what that is. It's setting up another event that's part of the chain to delay you from getting back to the inside notes. So it will work and it's believable so long as you know you follow it through. You know, like, so if you sit on G7 altered, you know, over D minor, then that's going to create a sort of sense of tension that's unresolved. So don't expect that to work too successfully. You know, you'd have to have a certain amount of confidence to pull that one off. You know,
fundamentally, we're talking about a strong grasp of harmony rather than necessarily the scales as the starting point, which I think is where a lot of guitar players go wrong, isn't it?
Well, you can. I mean, you could do that. I mean, so that's that thing about, like, that's more about chromaticism than I would even consider that to be outside playing. One could argue it is outside playing, but it's so transient it's almost unnoticeable. Right. So, like, I'll show you 2 ways of doing this. One is more harmonic and one is more melodic. Right, the same thing. Right? So, apologies for this D minor drone. It's going to drive you crazy after all, but just so that I've got it right. So it's useful to consider not only the notes that are in the scale. If anyone knows anything about modern art, you should look up an artist called Rachel Whiteread, who does sculptures, but not of the objects. She does sculptures of the spaces around them. So she'll do a sculpture of a chair, but it's not a chair. It's like she's basically put it in a mold, you know, things like that. And I thought it's kind of interesting. It's like, don't sculpt the object. Make the sculpture the space that's around it. And this is like me saying, don't play the notes in the scale, play the spaces that are around the scale. So it might be useful to know that if you play D Dorian, all the wrong notes are E flat minor pentatonic. That's all the wrong notes. So because there's 7 notes in the scale, there's 5 notes that are not in the scale. So it's probably not a bad idea to know what they are. Right? And the whole kind of bebop thing is knowing what they are. You know, so for example, between D and C, there's a gap. Between B and A, there's a gap. And between A and G, there's a gap. And between G and F, there's a gap. And between E and D. That's all those kind of phrases that you'll hear. Which is kind of like every note, you know, but it still sounds like D minor because it's like strong note, weak note, strong note, weak note, and so on. Right. So that's the sort of the bop thing. If you want to get chromaticism, I don't really think of that as outside playing, really, because you're basically only on the event for such a short amount of time that it's so transient that, you know, blink and you'll miss it, you know. Whereas outside playing is something that can be really sustained. So unless you're going to like really kind of go. And, you know, so agonizingly hang on that note, you're going to be off it before you know about it. So a way to do the same thing, a way to imply the same thing is take each of those notes, but embed it into something else where, so imagine if we were thinking triadically, right? So if I know I've got D minor as a triad, and I want to play E flat, I want to include E flat into my playing. So I'll play D Dorian, and I want to put E flat in. Well, one way I can do it is I can build a triad that contains E flat, where 2 of the notes of the triad are already in the scale and 1 isn't. So the E flat will be the note that isn't. So C minor is a good candidate for that. Because C minor, the C's in there, the G's in there, but the E flat isn't. So I can set up a move which is D minor, C minor. So I can imagine it's going to C minor, and then I get my E flat note, but not in a way that's like, you know, like the bop way, you know, which is that kind of thing. So there is the E flat note, like Pat Martino will go. Whereas this way, it's a way of going, you know, and you can make a pentatonic if you wanted to. So that was D minor pentatonic. Now I'm in C minor. I'm sort of switching between those two pentatonics there, D minor and C minor. And the reason why I chose C minor is because I expressly wanted to get the E flat note. If you know anything about altered scales as well, you know, in A altered you've got C minor pentatonic as well, so that's another reason why that works, because it's implying it's back to the 1-5-1 thing again, you know. But so there's one of the 5, and you can do it with the other 4. Right, so the other 4, the most obvious one would be if you want the major 7 in there, then you imply a 5 going to a 1. So if I want to get the sound of that, you know, the old Coltrane thing. Mr. PC solo, he starts off, he's playing over C minor, and he starts off with a G triad. Why? Because he wants to get the B note in there. So if I'm in D minor, I start off with an A triad. There's the C sharp. That's 9 out of 12. There's only 3 left, you know. So then you need to find a strategy to get the other 3, you know. So maybe, for example, if I wanted to get the A flat in there, I might imply a move from D minor to F minor. That's a really common move, the minor third transposition. So I imagine that move, you know. So I'm just imagining F minor going to D minor, and the reason why is I want to get A flat in there, but I don't want to do it in the bebop way, you know, the bebop way of getting the A flat in there, like to kind of go. But those kind of things. That kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's different to me setting up a move where I go from D minor to F minor, because then I can hang around, because I can stay on F minor. I can really stay on it, you know. I can set up a bar of D minor and a bar of F minor to create that sense of tension and release, you know. And is that all? That's 3 out of the 4. Then you could do G minor to go on to the 4 chord if you want to get the flat 6 in there, you know. If you want to get the major third in there, then we can go to B minor, go down a minor third.
Do you kind of thinking, I mean, not to pigeonhole things, are you thinking triad pairs? Or is it just,
or
just thinking of an outside note and then...
Triads or pentatonics I tend to think of, right? I tend to think of pentatonics, to be fair, because pentatonics is something that I love to play, and I can play them, you know. Like, you know, I'm so kind of in love with pentatonic scales because I can make them work. And, you know, but my version of pentatonics might not necessarily be the pentatonics that everyone else knows, you know. It just means 5 notes for me, you know. So something, you know, what we could get onto, I mean, I really kind of, one of the things I'm really kind of exploring at the minute comes from Michael Brecker, and that is to have some kind of pentatonic option from every one of the 12 notes against every chord. So, you know, I've got an option of what I can play off the flat 9 of a major 7 chord, you know, or what I can play off the flat 7 of a major 7 chord, and I can make it resolve, you know. So that way I'm not scared of anything. It's like any note over any chord is good. Right, and I've got things, and you know, I'm not saying I invented this, I completely got this from Brecker, but what I've done is, whereas Brecker would do this with arpeggios, because saxophone players aren't as in love with pentatonic scales as guitar players, I just see arpeggios, pentatonic scales as an arpeggio. They're just 5-note arpeggios, that's all they are. So I can do the same stuff that I can do with arpeggios with pentatonics. So that's kind of like, so that other thing, you know, that's setting up 5 moves. So, you know, I can imagine in my head, it's doing this, light my fire type of thing. Well, it's actually doing this, you know, and that's a way of me getting the major third into the act, you know. And so I've got 5 options to get each of the 5 notes that are missing, and I've done that with every tonality. So I can do that with major, I can do it with dominance, and so on. Yeah. So that gives you kind of a lot of things to potentially play over a 1-chord vamp, you know. So that's another thing.
This is the thing, isn't it? I mean, how do you work this into your playing? I mean, obviously we're talking about a lot of material potentially here.
Just audition it, you know. And as I say, usually what it starts off as something that's fixed, You know, like it won't be improvised. You know, I won't tell anyone, but it won't be. It'll be like a lick, you know, or something that I've kind of figured out as a thing. It'll be one version of a concept that could be infinite, you know. And then if I'm lucky, I'll bore myself with that, and I'll create 2 versions of it, and then 3, and then by the time you're up to 3 and 4, then you're beginning to kind of figure these things out in real time. But it starts life as one, you know, I call it making it concrete, you know. So I'll often say to students, you know, if I'm teaching players, and they'll quite often people will kind of like nod with affirmation. Yeah, I know that, you know, I understand that. And I always ask them the same question. I go, if I come and see you play, am I going to hear it? Right? Are you going to do that at any point? Am I actually going to go, oh, there you are doing that thing. I can hear you implying a, you know, minor third lower than the root, you know, when you're playing over a static vamp? Or is it just a bit of knowledge you've got, but you don't know where to use it yet, you know? And it seems like that's a common thing. And my way of combating that is just say, well, just do it in one way for now. You don't have to do it in every single possible way known to mankind. You just need to have a couple of ways to do it, you know. So and I experienced that with you know, with players, you know, like in terms of, when I say players, I mean like Brecker, you know, and Mike Stern and guys like the best in the world at this stuff, you know. They've got their things, you know. If I had £1 for every time I'd heard, you know, Mike Stern play over that, you know, go play that lick, you know, I'd be pretty rich, you know, because that's one of his patterns, you know, of a thing that you can do over a minor chord. You know, you can take a phrase and move it around in minor thirds, you know. Now that's pretty much infinite, you know, but that's what Mike Stern does. You know, as in, like, that's one of his. I'm sure he's got loads of them, but that's one of them, and I've heard him do it loads of times. You know, so with that in mind, this is a thing I got from Brecker, which I think he got from Gary Campbell, and this is kind of like now this is easy on the guitar but tough on the saxophone, and that is it's almost like sidestepping, but it's intervallic sidestepping, right? So you could take a phrase, and I think the one Brecker uses to demonstrate this is something simple like. That's really inside, just 4 notes. So apologies to any saxophone players who are looking at this and yawning now, because this will be old news to them, you know. Right. So what Brecker would do is he'd practice moving this in semitones. Or those kind of things. Now that's pretty tough to do, and then I'm kind of mutating it a little bit. Like one I went up, and then the other one to the opposite direction, but it's the same 4 notes, just in different permutations. Now that's pretty easy to do on guitar. It's not so easy to do on saxophone, where you've got to go A, D, G, yeah, C, G. I made a mistake there even. You know, you've got to kind of be aware of what all the notes are. You know, A, D, C, G, A flat, D flat, B, F. Oh, it's tough, you know. On guitar, we just move patterns around. But then he'd advocate moving in seconds. That kind of minor thirds. Sounding more like Mike Stern now. Major thirds. So any of those kind of things, like that major third thing, that's a chromatic scale now, because essentially what you've got is a whole tone scale harmonized with a note that's not in whole tone scale, which means there's only 2 whole tone scales. This is one of them, and this is the other one. The higher note is the other one. So that's a chromatic scale. So when can you use the chromatic scale? And the answer to that is anytime you want. So you can play those kind of ideas pretty much anywhere indiscriminately. You can do it in perfect fourths. Flat fives. And then you do that and you start going, oh, that's what Brecker's doing, you know, those kind of things, you know. And then you can take these things and, you know, and this is where Mike Stern's things come from, you know, where he's taking a similar phrase and moving it in minor thirds. And arguably that's from half whole, right? So now often you'll see players say don't use half whole in a minor situation because it's got this happening. It's got the major third, yeah. And I would agree, if you play it in a linear way, if I go, feels like it wants to do that. It wants to land on the major third. Sounds like major third, yeah, so we've got to find a way to flip that. But if you play it in a non-linear way, if you play it intervallically, it doesn't have that same characteristic. Where there's a kind of almost, if I play it in a line, you sort of know where it's going to land. This, however, hasn't got that sort of characteristic to it. So by playing these things in an intervallic way, it kind of breaks the spell, as it were. It has to resolve onto a certain note. So sometimes you'll find a school of thought in jazz harmony analysis that dominant options either have a major sixth or a minor sixth. So the major sixth is the major third of the chord that it's going to. That's why you'd struggle to make Mixolydian resolve to a minor chord, because it's basically saying the next chord will be major. The next chord's going to be major. I mean, of course you can make it work. And I could show you examples of people doing it. But it's not the most natural choice. You basically have to work a bit harder to make that work. So that's sort of, shall we say, we could call that intervallic transposition, and that's what Coltrane changes is. You hear guys doing all this kind of stuff. You move up in minor thirds. Those kind of lines where so the Coltrane changes is a major harmony moving in the major thirds. So you're in B and you play B, G, E flat, and you eventually get back to B again. That's what giant steps is, and all Moment's Notice and Central Park West and all those things. They're all based on just a cyclic progression that Coltrane's invented, that he juxtaposes over static harmony, or he'll play those changes over a 2-5-1. So if you can play a 2-5-1 over a 1, then you can play these substitute changes as well. So really all it is, it's just inventing a new narrative. A lot of this stuff is inventing a new narrative that you're aware of, right? And if you really want to hear this, you check, if someone wants to really explore hearing how this sounds at its sort of, in its most embryonic way, I'd suggest listening to an album called Miles Smiles. It's the Miles Davis Quintet with Herbie Hancock on piano. And it's where Miles is really breaking away from harmony. You can tell that he's trying to move away from songs going 1-6-2-5, bridge goes to the 4 chord or whatever. He wants to just play like Freedom Jazz Dance and just jam on B flat. Right. And the thing about it is Herbie at first, he sounds amazing, but it's, old habits die hard, So it's hard to just suddenly say, well, don't play off, just play off nothing, play off no changes. So you can hear Herbie imposing chord changes, over these sort of long, sort of flowing, endless vamps where there's no real harmony being defined. Well, he's actually inventing harmony to play off. It may not necessarily be the same harmony the bass player's playing. That's basically what's happening there, So the rhythm section's grooving on D minor, but Scott Henderson's invented some narrative that says, okay, well, you think it's D minor, I think it's D minor going to F, going to B flat, going to E flat, going to A flat, eventually winding its way back to D minor. Right, stick with me, I'll be back soon, And that there's a certain confidence of you have to sort of stick with it, and you're going to get back to where you're going to be in the end.
I suppose the critical thing there is everyone's listening to each other, right?
Yeah, and I suppose what you've got to do as well is let someone go with it as well, So for argument's sake, if someone's... It's a bit like when you hear players playing things that are deliberately against the grain rhythmically. The last thing the rhythm section should do is go with it. Right, that's like someone in the audience shouting out punchlines to jokes, thinking they're doing the comedian a favour. It's like, no, I set this tension up on purpose because I'm going to resolve it in a minute. If I move up a semitone, if I move to F over D minor, don't go with me. I don't want the bass player to play F. That's not the point. The point is you stay where you are. I'll be back with you in a moment. Like that, you've got to have the confidence to go. They know what they're doing. They'll return to home when they're ready, So that's I guess that's a thing as well. You've got to be really careful that the point of playing outside is that it's outside, So in a way, sometimes compas can do that, And very often if I hear someone playing and they're playing like altered tensions on a 5 chord or whatever, I'll leave them out. I won't follow it. It's like I don't need to kind of, that's almost like my ego getting the better of me, going, yeah, I've clocked what you're doing, yeah, raise 9 with a sharp 5. I'll do the opposite of that, because that's the whole point of it. The point of it is they want to create that juxtaposition. Another thing you can do is you can harmonize diatonic structures with non-diatonic events. That's kind of a really cool thing to do. That's like inside and outside at the same time. By that, what I mean is, say we take something like D Dorian, again, I'll give you that endless D minor loop. Okay, so D Dorian, if I play that on the E string, is, that's the note of the scale. So I could choose something that's maybe going to go inside and outside in parallel. So imagine if I do this, and I'm going to move that structure, that major triad, I'm going to move that through each of the notes of D Dorian, and some of them will be inside, like that's inside, if I go. But if I do this, that's not inside, right? But this is, so the note on the top is, but the notes underneath are not. So I'm essentially going in, out, 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 in. So I can set that up with, and you hear Borelli doing this all the time. Those kind of effects, So there, what I did is just did that so I played that as a line, and I might go, by way of going in and out. Does that make sense? So the notes on that, the highest note's inside, but what's supporting it underneath can be going in and out of tonality, and you can really push this. So that's quite consonant, because half of the events almost are inside, and you kind of go with it because you can kind of sense, you kind of know that's going to resolve. Like, stick with me. I'm going to. There's an end to this. That kind of thing. But you can do it with real bonkers things, so things that are not in at all. So like deliberately pick things that are not in. So maybe I'll do it with a major triad with a flat 5. That, say. So imagine that's. So let's pick the most inside that thing I could think of. A D minor triad, but I can go. Something like that. So I'm effectively going. Which is pretty out, but it works, And if you listen to my first album, I did a version of Swing 48, and played exactly that, over Django thing, D minor, and I play. That's the phrase that I played, and it's come from Woodshed and that, I thought, let's take something that's really in, and harmonise it with something that's really not in, take something that's really outside. So that's kind of like parallel reharmonisation, but the highest event is actually inside, and that's the glue that makes this kind of hold together, for want of a better word. The fact that something's got to make sense, because it's not just random stuff, Like, and why that will hopefully be believable is because the event on the top is my way out, because they're all in, but my support is out, and then balance that with blues lick or something, and you're in,
There's a level of trust there, isn't there? Because obviously the audience needs to go with it.
Yeah.
There are common notes that we can hear, so you kind of forgive the things which sound a little bit outside. That's
absolutely
kind of the idea.
100%, yeah, 100%. If you want to know what gospel piano players are doing when they're kind of playing all these other chords as well against static vamps, that's this kind of thing, which is, it's a similar thing where we could consider it to be take a point of agreement, right? A point that we're on agreement with, something that we can buy into, which is a strong melodic note that relates to the harmony, and then that's the buy-in, right? So that's how we buy into this, because if the note upon which everything else hangs is not something that is believable, then it's gonna collapse, right? So again, if we imagine, so if I'm in D minor, the A is a fairly strong note. Yeah, the A is the supporting wall, harmonically speaking. You know, it's a pretty crucial note against the D minor chord, right? So one thing you can do, and this is the kind of thing you hear piano players doing a lot of, is you can reharmonize, but from the top down, not from the bottom up. Most of us, we think of harmonization as being from the root and then we build above it. This is more like building a house by putting the roof on first and then building the house second. Right, so we think of the roof as the A. And we think, well, what could the A be? Well, of course, it could be the fifth of D minor chord. But it could be the raised 5 of a D flat altered. It could be the 13th of some kind of a C. It could be the 7th of anything, you know, some kind of a 7 or 11. It could be the major 7 of some kind of major 7. It's the root of anything, so maybe A altered perhaps, and you could do something. A altered. It's the flat 9 of an A flat. 13 flat 9. It's the 9th of a G13 perhaps. It's the minor third of F sharp minor 7, F sharp altered perhaps, raised 9 of that. It's the major third of an F. It's the the 4th of an E, and it's the flat 5 of an E flat, right? So that's every one of the 12 chromatic notes there reflected as some form of A, and they all sound right. Every one of them sounds right. Can't remember which ones I played, but you know. So I can play off any of them.
So essentially, you're using the new chords as a launch pad for an idea or scale or whatever.
Yeah. So you could play off any of them over a D minor amp.
Yeah, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and what you can do is you can use your A notes as the way into them. Right. So one thing you would do is you'd practice them not from the root of the chord. You'd practice them from A. Right. So you go D minor from A. And then maybe go half whole from A. And then maybe alt from A. And so on. You know, so you go from A, and then you can kind of treat the A as a pivot point. So I can go A into some D minor lick from A. But there's no reason why I can't go. You know, Mike Stern, lick or whatever, coming from that, you know. And on it goes, you know. Does that make sense? So because that's the pivot, right? Now, without wishing to sort of blow everyone's mind, there's no reason why that needs to be the top note. It could be in the middle, and you can pivot on either side. Yeah. So you can see like there's a lot in this.
It's like.
Yeah, so you know, so maybe that's that's kind of like where to leave that one. But you know, if you want to see someone talking about that kind of idea, then Joe Pass, if someone was onto that, Scott Henderson was onto it. You know, Joe Pass would say a modern player, modern exponent who I'm sure would be no stranger to any of this would be Julian Lage. You know, Julian would say, you know, get that, you know, put that underneath, fill the gap, you know, fill the gap with something, you know, play some kind of phrase, put that underneath it and fill the gap, you know, whatever you're going to play, you know, so put that underneath it and fill the gap with. Does that make sense? And the idea being is that you're aiming for that note, because that note could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. The note hasn't changed, and that note is a strong note in D minor. So that can be inside, but it could be really outside. Yeah. Or whatever, you know. So you can kind of like work those things in. And again, all that is doing is building up a fictitious narrative. You know, it's basically that's what it's doing. It's building in an imaginary harmonic thing you can do. I mean, and this is before we even get into, you know, like things like tone rows and palindrome sets and all this kind of stuff, you know, which is like, that's about, you know, those kind of things are about like just deliberately setting something up that's not consonant, like more like the kind of like things that if you might want to look into so one might want to look into things like Pat Martino's 12 chromatic designs and those kind of things. Joe Diorio would do these bonkers things like all those kind of yeah. The palindrome things are kind of interesting melodic structures. That's another sort of breaker type thing, which is intervallic ways of dividing the octave up that are the same going up as they are down. So for argument's sake, if you've got your D octave and you do a semitone, you get that kind of thing, or a tone would be, and a minor third would be, and a perfect fourth would be, and a flat five is, and a fourth and a flat second is, and you get those kind of ideas, and a second and a third is, you get all these kind of like, and they are sort of mysterious sounding, symmetrical or sort of quasi-symmetrical structures because they're symmetrical from the center outwards. And but again, the thing with these is it's just a way of generating effectively, without wishing to sound like getting too sort of overblown. It's just a way of inventing some chromatic weirdness, essentially. So whenever you play doing these kind of patterns, that's just a pattern of 5, with some displaced note. And if I'm ever doing any of those kind of things, I've usually got some kind of like destination in mind. It's like, okay, I want to hit that note, and I'm going to get to it. There's a resolution in mind. And again, it's just setting up a story, and you've decided what it is, and it can be something you've constructed, or it could just be a pattern,
It's really interesting. Everything that you do, like one of the best things you do is I've kind of always seen you a bit of a chameleon. You've got the kind of fusion rock thing, but then obviously there's the Django thing, and they all have a particular genre-specific way of playing the same ideas in a way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, the funny thing is, I'm sure some of the audience or some of the some other players might disagree. I have come up with a bit of resistance in certain styles. Like it's become a lot easier these days. Actually, the Django style in particular, where I've got a lot to thank. Like there's a new breed of Django players. Are you familiar with the Selma 607 guys? Yeah, like Adrian Moyard and Sebastian Junot and those players. So if anyone doesn't know about them, it started life as a record producer bought a Selma guitar serial number 607, which is only a couple away from Django's, and he basically got the cream of the Parisian, scene together to record an album, and the provision was that everyone used the same guitar. Same studio, same rhythm section, same everything. I think you could change the strings, use your own pick or whatever. And it's amazing when you listen to that record, there's like 6 or 7 different guitar players on it, how different they all sound, even though they're sitting in the same chair, it's the same mic in front of them, because they did videos that went with it as well. And a bunch of the players that have really come to the fruition from that style, Adrien Moyard's one, he's incredible, and Sebastian Junot is another, and there's a bunch of them. Like really, Rocky Gresset is another one. He's phenomenal, but they're really modern. They're really modern players. So they're into Michel Petrucciani, and that they know, they've checked out Brecker and stuff like that, and they're playing Django stuff, but they'll throw in these kind of ideas. And I found maybe 20 years ago, I got quite a bit of resistance from some players. Usually players, the audiences were usually fine, and weirdly enough, all the other kind of gypsy guitar players that were well known, your Stockelos and all those guys, they seem to really like all that stuff, because it's different from them. But some players would be like, "Oh, what you're playing is too modern, it's not doesn't fit the style. You're doing something else." But since Adrian has really kind of become so popular, it's kind of like dispelled that now. It's like, well, it's kind of all right, like he's sort of opened the door and legitimized it, so it's okay for everyone else, because he plays some super modern ideas. Plus, he's familiar with the tradition as well. I'm not saying he doesn't do the traditional thing, but he doesn't sound like someone like Stockelo Rosenberg, who's very deeply embedded in the tradition, Like, in a way, it would be like, kind of like, I don't know, like there's a big thing in bluegrass at the moment, isn't there? Billy Strings and all those kind of guys. And there's the traditionalists, the ones who really kind of do it a certain way, and then there's the players that are like really like just blowing the doors off, Chris Thiele and people like that, and even Julian Lage to a certain extent is sort of dealt is part of that world, So it's sort of like allowed me to get away with this type of stuff, if you know what I mean. But it's a different thing, if for argument's sake the brief were, sound like Django in the 1930s, then a lot of this vocabulary is out of bounds. Because it's not really what he would play. But that's not what I do anyway, really. In very rare circumstances, But that the only reason why I would do that would be if it was some form of pastiche, If that were the brief. But that wouldn't be me playing like me, that would be me fulfilling the role of the brief, if
Music wouldn't evolve, would it? This is the thing.
Yeah. Well,
It
there's
would
room
just
for it,
stay.
Well,
Yeah.
I think there's room for it, and even in that world, there's room for someone. I don't know if you know Fappy Lafferton, who's an amazing Belgian guitar player. Fappy still
No.
records in mono, like everyone sat around a mic, different distances away from the mic, like the Hot Club would, and I absolutely love him. He's amazing. If you want to see that, if you want to basically go, close your eyes, and you might as well be listening to Django. He's your man. He's the guy for that. But and that's fine, and there's room for that, But there's also room for Adrian or one of those more modern players, who you're going to go and he's going to be playing, flipping rhythm changes, and he'll be playing in E for, over the whole flipping, So that's something that you'll hear him do over 1-6-2-5 in B flat. Adrian will take a whole chorus just playing in E, right, and he keeps it going, Like listen to him playing Cherokee or something like that, You'll hear him just playing in E for the whole flipping shenanigans. You're not going to hear Django do that. I mean, I guess a lot of these things, and again, maybe a bit of a disclaimer might be, I probably wouldn't try most of these things out if you were doing a function gig. Next time you're playing Mustang Sally or whatever, I wouldn't think, oh, C major, that could be G minor, so I'll play the altered to, or whatever. That probably is not going to work if you go C7 is B flat over C, so I'm going to play F altered. Yeah, you might get
licks, not to play at someone's wedding.
yeah, you might get some funny looks. Yeah, at that point, But then, again, right, without wishing to kind of like make this sound like I guess I am, like a sort of Michael Brecker fanboy. Yeah, but listen to Brecker on that Dire Straits record. The one with the dobro on the cover. It's a Brothers in Arms. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And so Brecker's on saxophone on that record. And what's that? There's a one, my favorite trick or something like that. Is it called the melody? It's got a really strong saxophone melody. Brecker plays beautifully on it, and he's basically just playing minor pentatonic scale. But you still know it's him, and it's not like as if you feel like, oh, he's slumming it, or he's kind of like begrudgingly taking the money and dumbing his playing down. It's like, okay, given that these are the notes, let's make it sound glorious, and it's something, because I checked out Jim's podcast, which was brilliant. And one thing that and I've heard both of you guys talk about this is let's just make minor pentatonic sound good. So if you can't do that, maybe this other stuff's kind of redundant. This is not better than. I'm not saying any of this is cleverer than or it's better than. It's just another option, and you've got to make it sound good. If you can play all of these things and it's the time's terrible and the pocket's not right and execution's not good, it's just going to sound awful. This is not at the exclusion of having a good sound and putting it in the right place and your notes being in the pocket. I mean, Schofield can play minor pentatonic pretty well. He doesn't need to rely upon this. He doesn't use this as an excuse, to get away from not having great tone. Robben the same.
Yeah, I often come back to rhythmic phrasing is the thing that sets most of these players apart. It's like it's
Absolutely.
everything.
Yeah, that's a whole topic in itself as well. It's like, so we've basically just concentrated today on melodic outside playing, and that's one thing. Then there's also rhythmic outside playing. So you can play things rhythmically outside, and it's every bit as important. You can play the right notes, but then you just displace the rhythms, and that's just as out. That's really just as out. And some of that, the rhythmic outside playing, is something that can really make itself. Can be really useful when you are addressing chord changes. So that's something that I do a lot of, is I don't play the change that I'm playing over, I play with the next one. So if I'm playing over a progression, I'm already there,
So you're anticipating what's coming next, is that?
Yeah. So that's outside, because I'm on an E, playing over an E major. So I've been practicing Troubadour Bolero today. First two chords of Troubadour Bolero are E major, 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, E minor, 2 3 4. That's the first 4 bars, right? I would probably go 1 2 3 4. Now I'm in E minor, 3 4. Then it changes to E minor. I'm already there, like a bar ahead. And that's really out at that point in time. And anyone, if that's all they listen to with the first two bars, they'd think, what's going on there? You know. But then the reason for that then is revealed in bar 3. Okay, he hasn't lost his mind. Right, that's what's happening. It's going there. You know? And you can play around with that, you know. How early is early? You know, well, that's something that you can play around with. You could try maybe move a beat ahead. You know, a couple of beats ahead, like B.B. King, you know, anticipating the 4 chord. He does that all the time. And then you push it, you know, then you push it to see what the limits are, you know. What about if you played a bar ahead? It's all tempo dependent as well, of course.
Well, I guess it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, would you recommend something like that? Keep it simple, maybe like a blues, or I don't know.
2 chords, could be A major to A minor for all. So I use a terrible loop. The loop will probably sound horrible, so apologies if I'm just using the loop on my phone, you know. A really simple thing could be if we just did, say, A major to A minor, and you did like 2, 3, 4, so 105 beats per minute approximately. I'll do 4 bars, I'll do 2 bars of each. So I do 2 bars of A, 2, 3, 4. So 2 bars of A major, 2 bars of A minor. Conventional wisdom would say, I'm going to use major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. Conventional wisdom says you do this. So I'm on minor, now I'm on major. Now I'm on minor. There's no reason why you can't do this. Major, minor. That's when it changes. So I'm not going to play when it's on the chord, I'm going to play up to the change. Major, minor. So I'm actually playing on the wrong chord, but it works. So way ahead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah.
So I mean that's a kind of a simplified thing, but you could do that with a more complex tune. You know, so this is just by way of showing you what I practice. This is something I set up before. Just recorded the tune, the chords to that tune, Trouble on Bolero. Just to give you an example, if I play the arpeggios, it goes like E, E minor, A7, D major, C7, E7. Because that's playing when the changes occur. Now I'm going to go really early. So there I'm kind of pretty much a bar ahead of every chord.
Yeah.
Right. And that's maybe to over-egging it a bit, but that's I'm practicing it, you know. But you see the principle of it is you do that tastefully, and that was an exercise.
Well, I guess maybe this brings us neatly on. I'm aware that time's cracking on, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about practice. And you've always had this amazing way of, well, the way I view it anyway, this idea of compartmentalizing your time.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is, like how, you know, because there's potential, like all the stuff that we're talking about today, you know, it might blow people's minds, mine included. There's a lot to practice, right? So where do you start? You know, how do you put things together? How do you stop yourself going, oh, I'm going to practice this, and then 10 minutes later you're looking at something else? Like,
okay, so let's imagine, but related to what we're doing now, right? Imagine if we were having this conversation, and whilst we're doing it, I'm looking at my phone. I've got another computer on here. I'm answering an email. I'm kind of, let me just reply to this text message. And someone's coming in the door or whatever. Right. I'm sure anyone listening to it or watching it would be pretty frustrated with me because they'd say he's not present. You know, it's like he's kind of trying to do 5 things at once. You know, like if you went for a meeting with your, you know, financial consultant or whatever, your accountant or something, and his table was just full of like everyone's accounts were just all everywhere, you know, let me just find it, you know, under this massive pile. I don't think I'd feel too confident in him, you know. I want to go in and have my accounts in front of him up on the screen, and whilst I'm there, that's all he's concerned with. He's not thinking about the other thing he's got to do straight after I leave. He's really focused on the task at hand, you know. And practice is a bit like that, you know. If I'm working on one thing but I'm thinking about the next thing, I'm not really present, you know. Like, how can I really work on seeing if I can make D minor go into C minor work against the D minor vamp if I'm thinking about working on my sight reading or learning that chart for the song? You know, it's not going to happen. So what I found I have to do is, for my own sanity really, and for my own focus, is go, okay, what am I doing now? Right, what am I trying to achieve in the next half hour? Like, what's the thing that I'm going to work on in the next half hour? So I'll tell you now what the thing I'm going to work on when I start practicing is that, you know, I'm working on that tune, you know? And then I've also got another thing I'm working on, which is different pentatonics that I can play from half whole. But that's something I'm going to work on, and connecting them up through 2/5s. So I already know what it's going to be, you know. So I know what my practice is going to be. So I kind of decide in advance what I'm trying to achieve, and in that way, then I kind of know, at least then, if I'm doing it. Like at the end, I go, did I actually do what I was doing? Whereas I think sometimes if you practice and you're not really sure what it is you're trying to do, you never really quite know whether or not you're doing it. I see that with tutorials. Like, you know, the place where we work, sometimes we have these half-hour tutorials. Right? And I know within the first 10 seconds whether or not we're going to get anything out of the tutorial, based upon the fact that if I say, what are we doing? What are we looking at? And if someone's got a pretty clear idea what we're looking at, you know, they come in and go, I'm working on the tune Sunny, and I wouldn't mind having some ideas as to what you play over it. You know, so okay, cool, we can get some work done. We can do something in half an hour, because there's a topic and there's the subject, and we can actually like devise a plan of what we might actually be able to do to address that. We're not going to learn every single possible thing that you can do over Sunny in half an hour, but at least you'd walk out of the room with something in mind. You'd have something to show for it. Whereas, you know, sometimes, as I'm sure you'll experience yourself, Steve, you get people in tutorials and you go, what do you want to do? And you go, I don't really know, you know. I just like,
just teach me some cool licks.
Yeah, I want to get better, you know. I'm like, at what? You know, like be more specific. So now anyone who's been to me twice knows not to do that, you know, because I'm like, you're going to have to help me out here, because I don't know what you're into, you know. Like, I don't know what you want to know. I don't know where you're at. I don't know enough about your playing that I could do that for you. You know, I'd have to really know you pretty well, and I've heard you play quite a lot to kind of know, okay, when I hear you play, I hear you do, you know, whatever it might be, and then maybe my suggestion that something you could possibly do could be, you know, but you can only do that if you're fairly acquainted with where someone's at, you know. And some of these people that come in, I'm not that acquainted with them, so that's just too vague, you know. And I think that's the same thing with practice, you know. I often say it pretty much every lesson. I go, what's everyone been working on? And very often it's kind of silence, you know. And I think, okay, well, that's probably not being too productive, you know. Whereas the players that go, I've been working on, you know, melodic minor scale fingerings or something. Oh, cool. Well, show me what you've done, you know. And they've usually got something to show for it. And that's what comes from kind of having some kind of a plan, you know. Now, if you think that might be sort of like take the fun out of it, then you can always put in to the plan times to just play freely. That can be in the plan, you know. It could be, all right, I'm going to 10 minutes, just going to play for 10 minutes. I'm just going to play whatever comes into mind. Pick up the guitar and just play. But you can plan that. You know, that could be part of the plan, you know. And if you want to mess around with effect pedals for 2 hours, go for it. That could be part of the plan. You know, but that's different to saying, okay, that thing John was talking about where he said, imagine you're playing over one chord and you imagine a 2/5. Well, that's a specific thing that you can do, you know. So you can go, there's A7 going to, like, so can I spell out A7 with some kind of altered 10s and Cs? So can I set it with 2 bars of D minor, 2 bars of A7? And can I make that happen, you know, like the Robben lick? You know, that's the one that started got the ball rolling for me, was that lick he plays and Help the Poor. You know?
I was exactly the same.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. I was like, what is that?
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, that made sense of something that I knew intellectually, because saxophone players had told me about it. They go, oh, you can play the melodic minor scale a half step above. And I was like, oh, that's nice. But if someone would have said, like, where is somebody doing that? Like, point to me an example, like, play it to me, where could you hear that? Where could you experience that? And I didn't have that connection. So it was just a fact, like a bit like, some people can be like that, where they're very, like, sometimes knowledge is overrated, knowing stuff, right, isn't what it's all about, like, so, and that's one of the problems with the YouTube tuition in it, because people have watched what's that guy called, does all the interviews,
Rick Beato.
Yeah, because they watched a Rick Beato video on flipping Barry Green's diminished sixths or whatever. They think that they've got it down, and then when I go and see him play, and they just play blues scale all night, it's like, so knowing it isn't it, knowing it is only not even half of it, because there's players who don't know it who can do it. You speak to Borelli about Barry Green's diminished sixth substitutions, you wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about, but then you hear him play and you go, you don't need to know. It's like, you can just do it, So I'd rather, like, do you really need to know when you're speaking with your friends? Do you think about the function of, adjectives in a sentence? Probably not, It's not that it's useful, to know how to conjugate a verb is useful, but in the application, it's sort of, it should be subconscious. It's not something that should be to the fore, So that's the difference between practice and playing, isn't it?
So, I mean, typically, if you had, I don't know, your typical, you've got 2 hours this afternoon, I assume you're practicing for your gig. Like, how do you, I mean, maybe that's a little bit different, but
no,
typical afternoon session, you've got 2 hours. How do you divide your time?
I try to do 4 things. Right? I try to do 4 things.
So half an hour each?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Repertoire trumps everything. Repertoire always wins, right? Because repertoire is the thing that's got a time and a date next to it. Because, it's no good me turning up to a show or gig or whatever, not knowing the tunes. But I've got some cool altered idea that I've figured out, or whatever. The band's not going to be impressed by that. So repertoire, generally speaking, is on a need-to-know basis. So that wins. That's going to beat everything. So if I only had half an hour to practice, or 10 minutes to practice in a day, then it would probably be repertoire-based. Be around some kind of thing that's coming up, right? And repertoire could include vocabulary. In the rare instances where I haven't got something to learn, which is not that common, but it happens, then that could be when, again, fortunately for playing jazz music, there's always the standards, there's hundreds of them, and I don't know them all, and there's always that thing of, I should really know that tune, and I don't know it. So that could be that. It could also be, intros, endings, lines even, that's repertoire to a certain extent. Or it could be your own music, so I'm kind of in the middle of the 3rd album, which is like solo tunes. So that happens every day. I just make something that happens every day, just to make it a thing, It's like it's a feature of my, I wouldn't have a day where I didn't brush my teeth, Like, it just wouldn't happen. No matter how busy I am, I probably wouldn't forget to eat, So likewise, I'm going to work on the important things. They're going to be something that's going to happen every day. So at the minute, I'm working on these solo arrangements, and I make certain that I do some work, even if it's just 10 minutes, right? Just so that it remains prominent feature. Because if something doesn't happen daily for me, it can pretty often become forgotten. Stuff's going to, sand's going to, it's going to be covered in sand before long, and it's going to be, remember that thing that I wanted to do and I've completely forgotten about. So it needs to be, for me, I find I'm a habitual type of person, I need to revisit things. So repertoire's one.
Over the years, John, I've stolen some of your phrases in my own classes. Like, one of my favorites is your kind of firefighting analogy.
Yeah, that's maintenance and stuff, isn't it? That's when you try something, right? So last night, Carl, the other guitar player, called a tune Made in France by Borelli Legrand, and I absolutely butchered it, right? Because I played it for ages, right? So that's getting fixed today, right? Without a doubt. At some point before 7 o'clock tonight, I'm running over that tune, and I'll fix it. It'll take 10 minutes, But when it was just called in the moment, let's do that. Right? Okay, great, and it was like 10 seconds in, it was like, not so great. It's like,
moment of terror.
yeah, it's like, shit. But, I'm in, so, yeah, you just got to get on with it, and that's okay. It wasn't super high pressure, and that's the nature of doing things a lot. You can, hopefully I'll get a pass on that one, and I can redeem myself tonight. That's another advantage of playing a lot is you can redeem yourself. If you mess something up on Thursday, you can fix it on Friday.
It's like the football team that loses.
Yeah,
it's the next game. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I've noticed that with certain players who don't play a lot, and you know, remain nameless, but one who's very, very influential in my life. You know, we practically didn't really gig. You know, and then what it meant is that every gig became this really monumentally important thing, and it's almost kind of paralyzing. You know, you've got to be careful that it becomes routine, so that it doesn't become too much of a big deal. You know. Like that kind of happened in lockdown, didn't it? When we came back and you could kind of play sporadically, but they were months apart. You know, there's a lot riding on it.
Yeah,
you wouldn't want to play badly and then have to sleep on that for 3 months before you do the next one. So maintenance is the second thing. So first one's repertoire, maintenance, and that's the firefighting thing. That's okay. What needs oiling? Basically, that's what that is. That's what haven't I worked on? Because the more stuff you know, the more stuff you've got. It's kind of like, it's a nice idea to have lots of guitars. Unfortunately, I've got a lot of guitars, but I'm constantly at the guitar. You know, they've always got one. My guitar, guys who do my guitars have always got one of my guitars. You know, there's always something that needs fixing. The same thing with my playing. There's always something that needs fixing. So for me today, it's made in France because I absolutely destroyed it yesterday. So I'll fix that today. But so that's one. I don't mind if that one's a little bit all over the place, because that's one that's there to fix a specific thing, and once it's fixed, I can move on. I don't need to keep on at that. I just can do it for all it needs, and then move on to the next thing. You know, on an as and when basis. The third thing is new stuff. It's like developing like new ideas to sort of like get new things into the act, so to speak. And at some stage, everything I said today was on that list. Right. At some stage, every one of those things that I've kind of gone over today would have been on that list. Now they're not on that list, because now they're on the things to maintain list, because I've kind of got them down, so I don't need to keep practicing them with that level of intensity. I just need to keep on top of them, basically. And half of the way of keeping on top of them is to actually use them. The other half is when you do use them and they don't work, then to just revisit them now and again. You know? And it's one of the reasons why doing things like this and why teaching's so great is, in a way, you kind of get to practice these things whilst you're showing somebody else how to do it. Yeah? You're going over it again in your own mind, aren't you? You know all about that, Steve. Yeah? It's a way of reinforcing stuff. If you can explain it to someone else, you've got to be really quite clear in your own mind as to what it is you're trying to achieve. And that clarity kind of helps in terms of, okay, you can sort of travel light, because all I need to remember is the concept that how I do it, that could be different. You know, if for whatever reason we did this again, I'd probably play completely different examples to illustrate every one of the same concepts, you know. So at the minute, the two new things for me that I'm working on is 2-part playing, and I'll be on it for the next 6 months or whatever, probably. And I'm kind of this pentatonic things that I was talking about, you know. I've got a different pentatonic from every degree of every chord that I can play over, stuff like that, you know. And then I can do all this stuff, you know. So that's a kind of an interesting one, where if I know against A7, and if I treat it as A Lydian flat 7, I've got 7 possible pentatonic scales I can play against that. But then I can also go from E7 to A7. That's like going from B flat 7 to A7. That's tritone sub, yeah. Right. What that gives me is 7 pentatonics off this, 7 pentatonics off this. That's 14 pentatonics, and all 12 notes are reflected in that. Right. So you've got a pentatonic option, and you can play them all over the one chord. Right, off every note. That's pretty powerful, you know. So I'm basically what I'm doing with that is I'm auditioning the options to find the ones that I think sound really cool, and then I'll start off by making like composed phrases that do it, and then I'll start dropping them into tunes, you know, like licks, as it were, with a view to. That's not the end.
Do you document this stuff? Do you write it down, or do you record it? I mean,
but bit of both, bit of both, I do, yeah. So I've got all kinds of like maps of this stuff notated, and then I'll make pathways, you know. So for example, if I'm going over 2-5-1, you know, then I've got pentatonic pathways of every degree, you know. So, you know, you might see 2-5-1 as D minor to G7 to C. Well, I can see it as D minor to E flat 7 to E minor, right? Because I know there's a D minor pentatonic, there's an E flat dominant pentatonic that works against G7, right? And there's an E minor pentatonic that works against C major 7. That's a pathway, you know. So D minor works against D minor, of course it does. Okay, E flat works against G. Why? Because G comes from A flat melodic minor, and the 5 chord's E flat 7. It's in there. It's the altered scale. That's what I'm playing, is the altered scale. I've just looked and found the pentatonics, and there's a pentatonic that comes from that, that, so I can go. And on it goes, I've got loads of different ways of doing that, from every degree, So that's something, and that's the thing with that, is that developing new skills. I found I'm really methodical, as I maybe hopefully has come across. But what I would say is I'm super slow. I'm really, really slow. I don't find any of this stuff. So if anyone's listening to this or watching it, thinking, "Oh my God, how do I approach this?" Well, remember, like, I'm 56 years of age in 2 weeks, and I've been playing guitar since I was about 10, and I've been practicing pretty consistently from about 14 or 15. So that's 40 years of practice, Like, so none of this came quickly. I don't think any of it came quickly for me. But I'm really driven to and committed to it. So if this takes me 6 months to get a new idea in, that's fine, I'm really slow at releasing music as well. It's like an album every 10 years almost. So if it took me 3 or 4 years to get some new ideas, well, then I'm ready for the next record. Because that's what part of this is about as well. Because I don't see the point in releasing the same stuff in a different key. There needs to be some growth where I can go, I can hear that on that thing that wasn't there on the first one because I didn't know how to do it. I hadn't even imagined it was possible. So the stuff I can hear from the second album that I brought out of my stuff that I couldn't do on the first one. Not only could I not do it, I couldn't even imagine it, So I think there's a point to this. So that's why I'm quite happy if it takes 6 months to get a new idea into my playing, and I really feel like as if it's something that's identifiable, so that when someone hears you, you're the guy who does that, because this, I don't pay lip service to this, because they're not just small things. They're basically, what I'm talking about is carving your style. Right. So the things that I want to say, I'm working on new ideas. What I mean is I'm adding something to what I might consider to be the style that I play, and that's a big deal, Like that you've got to be selective. You've got to be choosy when it comes to that, because some of the things about defining your style is about deciding what you're not going to be, So I'm practicing these two topics. I'm aware of the fact that I'm doing that at the exclusion of a whole bunch of other stuff. But it just has to be like that.
The key thing I'm getting from all of this really is consistency, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because I think so many guitar players, they sort of plateau when they're about, I don't know, let's say 30. But we all see these, guitar players, they sort of just stay at the same level. And I think it's just not picking up the guitar, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, I understand why as well, because some of it's about distractions as well as this. Because, like, I, in a way, I'm kind of a little bit glad that I sort of grew up in the era that I did, where all this stuff wasn't there, because. I'm not one for, like, people often say, have you seen that video on YouTube? And I'm like, no, I don't watch the YouTube video. The only time very rare instances where something sort of piques my interest, I will watch YouTube videos of, Rick Beato interviewing Pat Metheny or something, or, I've seen the George Benson one, that's great. But I don't troll YouTube every day, to find, new ways to play over a 2.5, because I've got other things to do, and partly because that stuff wasn't around when I was kind of getting it together. It's like the information was pretty rare, but then consequently it was quite valuable, and it meant that you tended to stick with stuff, And with Tomo Fujita, Tomo's got that thing where he says, I pick 3 albums and stick with it for like 3 months or something, I'm terrible when it comes to listening to music as well. It takes me forever, like weeks to get around to stuff. But I'm sort of meticulous when I do. And the same thing with practice, So that would be like the third of the 4 topics, is that one of those new things, And the fourth one usually is applying the stuff, putting it together into some kind of musical thing. Like, so it's one thing, me working on, so today I'm looking at pentatonic superimpositions coming from half whole. And I've devised some pentatonic things that you can play from every degree. Fortunately, with half whole, you only need 2 of them because it moves in minor thirds. But then what you can find is connections to the 2 and the 1. So we might think, okay, so if you're in C major, you're D minor, some kind of pentatonic thing, you're D minor pentatonic, you're over D minor, and then you've got D flat 7 flat 9, because that's coming from G7. That's one of the ones that you've got. Yeah, going to like C major, and you're like C major 7, so you could kind of go. kind of as a pentatonic thing, and then find ways to get through that. But that's not the only one, because remember, you've also got G, B flat, D flat, and E, 7 flat 9. Right? So they're the 4 7 flat 9 pentatonics that are your options against the G7 chord. Right? So each of those will resolve in a certain way. So of course, against D minor, I can play G7, just G7 on G9, like the Wes thing. And then against G7 flat 9, I can play G7 flat 9. And against C major, I can play G major. That gives a Lydian sound. So that's one connection to explore. Okay, then I can look at the B flat connection and see what I can play there. So I can play A minor pentatonic against D minor, because A minor is in D minor. And I can play B minor pentatonic against C major. And everyone knows that Schofield thing. It's kind of a common Schofield thing. But one that you might not have spotted is you can go A minor, B7, B flat 7, flat 9, because it's from G7 flat 9, going to B minor. So that's a pentatonic option. So I go over 2, I can go, and then over 5, I go 2, and so on, and on it goes, So trying to explore in all these different ways, so that when you see 2-5-1, which happens just everywhere, it's just,
yeah, infinite.
Yeah, but then the applying things, this is the 4th thing, it's all very well and good knowing that, but am I going to do that when I play? Is that going to happen when I play? So then I have to dedicate some time to shoehorning this stuff into actual music, or else it becomes a thing that and not necessarily something that one does. Yeah, so that's...
would you look at repertoire you're going to play on a gig and then kind of go, well, can I put this in?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing it with Made in France and Troubadour Bolero today, as soon as we're finished here. Right, so Troubadour Bolero goes E major to E minor, then it goes to D major, C, and the bridge section goes A minor, D7 to G diminished to G. I'm going to do it there. I'm going to go A minor, D7 flat 9, which I know is B7 flat 9, which I know is F7 flat 9, which I know is A flat 7 flat 9. So I've got a pentatonic for all of them. And I'm going to tag them and see if I can make it work.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Yeah, but the thing is, it might only be one way, right? I might only have 1 or 2 ways to do it initially. But then if you go, oh, I like that, right? I like the way that sounds. That's an interesting little pathway, So I've auditioned this loads of times. I know I love the way in a 2-5-1 it sounds when you go up rather than down. So I know that in a 2-5-1 I could go A minor, A flat 7 to G, right? But I also know I can go A minor, B flat 7 to B minor. Why can I do B minor? Because B minor is G.
Yeah.
Right. It's basically G major is B minor over G. So I can go A minor, coming from A minor, of course. B flat 7, coming from E flat melodic minor, which is D altered. It's in there. It's not. I'm not making anything up. I'm not adding anything. It's not even outside. It's actually in the harmony. Going to B minor, because B minor is G major. So that's an alternative 2-5-1 narrative that you don't get if you just see A to D to G. And that's going to give me new ideas and new lines to play on the tired old 2-5-1, which I've been aware of for about 30 years. So so if you can find a new way to play through it, and trust me, man, Chick Corea knows that. Scott Henderson would be going, yeah. If I said that to him, you can play that, he's going to go, of course.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a surprise to him, because he's put that level of work in. Frank Gambale would know this. I'm pretty sure. And that's the thing. It's like, I always give the same example. I remember seeing John Schofield at a masterclass, and someone in the audience getting a bit irate because he was going, "What are you playing over minor chords?" And like the guy was thinking as if Schofield was holding back on the answers, because he literally just said minor stuff. He wasn't being flippant. It's just because I think people think he's going to go, "Oh, I've got the secret scale that I'm not telling you," And really, it's just the stuff that's out there. He just knows it better than most. That because he's looked at it and gone, well, what lives in that family? What lives in altered? If I know D altered, well, I know that in D altered there's an A flat 7 and a B flat 7. They're in there. Borelli knows it too, because Borelli will play over that chord. He might not know theoretically, but I've heard him go, play stuff like that. That's a phrase Borelli will play, and I look at it and go, that's an A flat and a B flat and an A flat and a B flat over that chord. So somehow he knows it,
Yeah.
Instinctively. I guess, or maybe he's learned it because he's heard it, and I've heard that, I like that, So I know it because I've dissected the altered scale. Borelli knows this because he's heard Joe Pass play it, probably, or whatever, Kind of how you get it in there doesn't really matter. The audience doesn't care. Just, can you get it out?
Well, listen, John, I don't want to keep you from your practice.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. It's been super insightful. I hope super inspirational for everyone. And
Thanks.
yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, anytime. It's anything I can do to help, man. Just let me know. And it's great to see you, Steve. Of course,
I'd love to. Yeah, exactly. I haven't seen you for months, so.
Yeah. As I say, just shout out anytime. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I hope I haven't gone on too much or burnt everyone's brain with this stuff.
Well, no, it's been super great from my perspective. So thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, mate.